And then we can. Okay, I remembered to push the button. Welcome to those of you in Zoom land and those of you here in the Chalberg Theater. In conjunction with Hispanic Heritage Month, we have Reverend John Fanestil with us today. He's the brother of Jane Peterson, who is our Raiders volleyball coach. And she said, my brother can talk to our community about the border culture. And I thought that would be perfect. A native of San Diego, Reverend Fanestil is a graduate of Dartmouth College, Oxford University, where he studied as a Rhodes Scholar, and the Claremont School of Theology. He also earned his Ph.D. in history from the University of Southern California, specializing in the history of early America. He's worked for decades in movements for social justice, beginning with his work in the Central American Peace Movement. He convened the Friends of Friendship Park, a coalition of local stakeholders advocating for public access to the historic meeting place overlooking the Pacific Ocean on the border between San Diego and Tijuana. He's also worked with friends from Tijuana to convene El Faro, the border church, a weekly celebration of communion at Friendship Park. And he's currently the, oh my gosh, where am I here? The executive director of VIA International, and I've lost my spot. Maybe John, I'll let you explain exactly your work there. And so I'll go ahead and turn the camera. I'm going to spotlight you and turn the camera at the audience. So you can.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. And thanks for this invitation and greetings all. Greetings from San Diego and from Tijuana. I'm presently working as the executive director of VIA International, which is a nonprofit organization based here in San Diego, but we have a sister nonprofit on the Mexican side of the border called Los Niños de Baja California. So it's a binational nonprofit that works on both sides of the border in a ranging number of projects having to do with community development. I'm glad to answer questions about VIA International if you'd like, but I understand my purpose here today is to introduce you to something of the peoples and the cultures of the U.S. Mexico borderlands. And my suspicion is that most often when you hear mention of the border in your news feed or online or on television, that you'll hear it associated, of course, with our ongoing challenges of immigration and asylum seeking and crime and violence, all those things that capture the headlines and attention from media outlets who are not based in the borderlands. So I know the border is associated with all kinds of things in the popular American imagination. And I thought what I could accomplish today in our short time together was to introduce you to some of the peoples who actually live here and who rarely make the news. You perhaps will have heard of some of these people, but I'm guessing that you may not have a good sense of who these people are and how they understand themselves, their identities, and self-affirmations as people who live along and across the U.S. Mexico border. So what I have in mind to do is to introduce you to three types of people. We'll hear an extended video clip from three individuals, and each of them is very representative of a large population of people who you might not might not be so familiar with, and it might not be the first people that come to mind when you think of the U.S. Mexico border. The three types of people I'm going to introduce you to are Chicanos. I know you will have heard of that word, but I'm guessing perhaps many of you don't know exactly where that language comes from. And then also the category of people or a type of person who would, in this part of the world, identify as a fronterizo. We don't have a good word for that in English. In Spanish, fronterizo means a person from the borderlands, from the frontera. And then the third type of person would be people who are in what are commonly called mixed status families. And again, I'm sure you've heard of that, but perhaps might not be exactly familiar with what constitutes a mixed status family. And the way I thought I'd do this is by giving you a little whirlwind tour of the San Diego-Tijuana borderlands. And I thought we could do that just beginning by Google Earth. So what I want to do is just give you a sense of where we're going to travel today and where we're going to drop in and hear from some people who live right here on the U.S. Mexico border. And I want to begin at a park in the barrio, the urban neighborhood, the historic urban neighborhood of San Diego, called Barrio Logan, or Logan Heights. And this park is called Chicano Park. And it's now a national landmark. It's a park filled with murals in the historic traditional style of Mexican muralismo. The murals at Chicano Park are famous around the world. Over 100 murals are painted onto the pillars of highway overpasses that, when the highways were built here in San Diego in the 1960s, divided and threatened to eradicate the historic barrio of San Diego. But the residents of Barrio Logan, of Logan Heights, fought back and occupied the park and claimed it as their own. And since that time, now well over 50 years, have been sustaining Chicano Park as a landmark location in the San Diego-Tijuana borderlands. So the first person I'll introduce you to is a friend and colleague of mine. He actually works with me at Via International, and his name is Rigoberto Reyes. Rigoberto Reyes is a long time, his family is a longtime residents of the San Diego-Tijuana region. And we'll give Rigo about 10 minutes to introduce himself to you. And I think you'll hear in his expressions and in his accent and in his self-presentation an understanding of how it came to be that so many people, especially here along the U.S. Mexico border, came to identify and understand themselves as Chicanos. So here's let's just enjoy listening and chatting for 10 minutes or so with Rigoberto Reyes.
Welcome to Chicano Park. We are right at the heart of Logan Heights. We refer to this place as el ombligo del barrio, or the belly button of the barrio. I am here to talk to you about the history of this park, to give you a context of the park and the importance to this community. But I think before we do that, I want to give you a context overall before I talk about the history of the park. I think it's important to understand even where the name comes from, the name Chicano, at least the concept or the theory behind it. For many of us that are here, we have been here before this was the United States. Yet, here in the United States, we're still seen as outsiders. We're still seen as immigrants. We're still seen as wetbacks, if you will. Even though some of us have been here way before this was the United States, specifically our brothers, the Kumeyaay Nation. They've been here for thousands of years. Yet, here in the United States, we're still seen as outsiders. The irony here is that people such as myself, if I go back to Mexico, in Mexico, we're no longer Mexicans. In Mexico, we are already outsiders also. In Mexico, we are what people they call vendidos or sellouts. In Mexico, we are pochos. A pocho is a term widely used throughout Mexico to refer to someone who has lost its language, its culture, their identity. So we, as people on this side, start struggling with that. In a sense, kind of asking ourselves, and very specifically during the civil rights movement, We have to understand that the civil rights movement wasn't just happening in Alabama. It was happening all over the world. It was happening in France. It was happening in Mexico City. For those of you who are not familiar, in 1968, Mexico hosted the Olympics. In that particular case, students from Mexico, university students, decided to organize a protest against the government and all the injustices that the Mexican government was doing against them. And because the government wanted to shut them down, over 300 students were disappeared in Tlatelolco, Mexico City. To this day, we don't even know what happened to those 300 students. My point here being is that the civil rights movement was happening all over the world. And here in San Diego, and particularly here in the southwest of the United States, it was no different. We were also confronting similar issues that the African Americans were suffering back in Alabama and in the south of the country. And particularly at that particular time and place, we were struggling with our own identity. Again, having the message that we're not from here, having the message that we're not from over there. Well, if I'm not from here, if I'm not from over there, where the heck am I from? So we start struggling with that. We start struggling with that identity as far as who we are, particularly during the 1960s, mid-60s, when we were, again, looking for our own identity. Now, we don't deny the fact that we are mestizo. Mestizo is a mixture. It's a mixture of both European and indigenous blood. For us, it's not a denial, but it's particularly when we're looking for our own identity and we started researching our own roots and particularly focusing more and more in our indigenous roots. We start identifying stronger and stronger with that aspect of who we are as a people. The Spaniards conquest this particular continent, and the abuses that were done to the indigenous people are still seen pretty clearly today. I think it's important to even realize that us here on this side of the border are in strong solidarity with all indigenous people, not just the indigenous people here, not just the indigenous people in Mexico, but the whole indigenous throughout the world. Why? Because we're in the same boat. We're suffering similar oppressions. We are suffering similar circumstances. I venture to say that here on this side of the border, for those of us that identify as Chicanos, we are probably in stronger solidarity with the indigenous populations than actual Mexicans. The reason I say this is because in Mexico, as proud as they are of the Aztec calendar, as proud as they are of the pyramids in Teotihuacan, there's a strong oppression and discrimination against indigenous people throughout Mexico. And you don't have to go deep in Mexico to see this or experience this. You don't have to go to Oaxaca or Chiapas or Michoacan to see this. You go 20 miles away from here and see how Mexicans actually treat the indigenous populations. It's still very oppressive, it's still very discrimination. And you'll see that support and you'll see that solidarity throughout this park. Many of the images, if not all, many of the images kind of tell that story as far as it reflects our indigenous roots. Now for us, going back to what I started saying earlier, when we started identifying or trying to get our own identity and trying defining who we were as a people, we start researching. We start researching as far as our indigenous roots. We find our Mexica, better known as the Aztecs roots, that according to Mexica history, the Mexica were from a place known as Aztlán. Aztlán. that particular area that they migrated from. They migrated and they traveled for over 200 years to find the promised land. In this myth or in this history, the great god Huitzilopochtli appears to the Aztecs and asks them to migrate and travel and find the promised land. Now, the land that they departed from, the land of Aztlán, when we were looking for our own identity and started researching that particular aspect, we find that the land that the Mexica parted from was actually today, what today is the Arizona Sonora Desert. That was the parting point of the Mexica. They traveled for 200 years until they found the promised land. That promised land, you could see it in this particular mural, was when they found an eagle in top of the cactus in the middle of the lake devouring a serpent. That was the sign that they were looking for. And the mural here kind of tells that story. It is the founding of Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan, today known as Mexico City. Within that history, or within that story, we grasp into the roots of the departure of the Mexica from the land of Aztlán. And us at that particular time, we proclaim that was our motherland, Aztlán. And in today's terms, we claim the whole Southwest, which was once Mexico of the United States, as the land of Aztlán. For us as an identity, we grasp into that history, we grasp into that identity. So for us as indigenous people, we get or we adopt the term from the actual term of Mexican. The actual term in Nahuatl, the original tongue of the Mexica Aztecs. In Nahuatl, the actual term is not Mexican. It's not even Mexicano. The actual term is Mexicano. Thus, we take the term Chicano from the term Mexicano and call ourselves Chicanos from the land of Aztlán.
So I don't know if you were familiar with that history, but I didn't know it until I began working with these peoples along the U.S. Mexico border. I, of course, had heard of Chicano, but I did not know that it came from a Nahuatl word, Mexicano, referring to the original peoples who founded Mexico City. The next stop I want to take you to is actually the border itself. So let's go back to Google Earth. And just to give you a sense of scale, we're going to travel from Chicano Park, and we're going to go down to the San Ysidro port of entry, which is the busiest border crossing between San Diego and Tijuana, and in fact is the busiest land border crossing in the world. At this location, and actually I'll scale out a little bit so you can get a sense, you have the county of San Diego. Population is about 3.5 million people, and the municipio, or the municipal area of Tijuana, also a population of 3.5 million people. In many ways, it's a single metropolis of over 7 million people, connected by these arteries and by these border crossings. The principal one of which, and the busiest one of which, is the San Ysidro port of entry. San Ysidro, the southernmost community of San Diego, connects into the neighborhood in Tijuana called El Chaparral. And across this, through this port of entry, before COVID, there are travel restrictions related to COVID, but on a typical day before COVID, 130,000 people would cross every morning from Tijuana to enter San Diego. It's like moving a small city back and forth across the border. The same 130,000 people would return to Tijuana at the end of the day. And here in this image, I hope you're getting a good enough image, you can see the line of cars that pour into what are now 44 different garitas, or little checkpoints, and that allow automobiles to travel from Tijuana into San Diego. On either side of this freeway are pedestrian entries, pedestrian east side of the freeway, pedestrian west side of the freeway. 130,000 people, therefore, their daily life involves crossing the border. These are folks who are by and large Mexican ancestry, principally U.S. citizens who are choosing to live in Mexico for reasons of the cost of living, but who work at low-wage jobs in San Diego. I wanted to introduce you to just one of those people, my colleague Aida Amador. Aida is also very much a fronteriza, a borderlander, or a border crosser, but not the border crosser that you would hear about in the news, because her life is in some ways all too ordinary to make the news. While it may be ordinary, I also find it beautiful, and I find Aida charming, and I hope that you will too. And so we'll take a little listen to Aida Amador. And here we go.
Hi everyone, this is Aida, and we are going to San Diego. I don't know if you can see, but that's Lincoln. I was born in San Diego. My family lived in Tijuana. My first memories of the border are related to family. What I remember is Sunday mornings, getting up, having breakfast, and being excited because we were going to El Otro Lado, which is San Diego for everybody that lives in Tijuana. And it was so much fun for me because my dad used to work a lot, so the Sundays were just for us, just for family. And I remember just hopping into our car and my brother and sister just laughing, having fun. And it was probably 3 hours because a lot of people in Tijuana did the same thing. But it was fun. We had games, we had food, lots of food. I don't know if any of you have ever been in Tijuana, but there's a lot of street vendors. So you can get anything. Pizzas, hot dogs, burgers, burritos, churros, you name it. And they're delicious. And this was in the early 80s. We used to go all the time because at that time, El Tratado de Libre Comercio was this, I think it's called North America Free Trade Agreement. We didn't have a McDonald's, we didn't have a Chuck E. Cheese, I don't know if you know what it is, but like video game restaurants. We had the zoo nearby, we had SeaWorld, Disney, Universal Studios, you name it. It was just half an hour away. So for us, it was just exciting just to cross the border. So it was lots of fun, and I tried to do the same thing with my kid. We always have such a good time crossing the border. Like, we make it a game. I ask him what line that you want to cross, and he's like, oh, I want number 1, and I want number 3. So we always make a game out of it. Dile muy fuerte. Hi. Sí, perdón. ¿Qué le vas a decir?
¿A dónde vas, hijo?
A Chula Vista.
¿Qué vas a hacer allá? ¿Allá vive?
No. ¿Qué le vas a decir, pues? ¿Qué le ibas a decir al señor?
¿Y algo que quedar?
No, nada.
Buen día.
Gracias. Dile bye bye. Good job.
So that's just a few minutes from Aida Amador, who's one of hundreds of thousands of people who cross the U.S. Mexico border daily. The third, and she would be again very representative of this category of people who would identify themselves very strongly as fronterizos or fronterizas, the feminine. And I've heard many fronterizos, friends of mine, while Rigo in his presentation about Chicano history and identity emphasized that struggle for identity and that sense of not belonging neither here nor there. I hear many fronterizos who are very rooted in this place and really feel strongly that they are rooted on both sides of the border, who have flipped that and really claim it in a positive way. They say, soy de aquí y soy de allá. I am from here and I am from there, both at the same time. I once visited with a woman while I was working as a pastor whose life was very much on both sides of the line. And she told me, I am 100% Mexican and 100% American. And she said that in both languages, flawless English and flawless Spanish. So the sense of identity and language and culture that is deeply rooted in the borderlands, some people would claim that identity for themselves as fronterizos, borderlanders, border residents, border crossers. And then the third location and the third type of person, and I want to introduce you to, is are people who would belong to extended families, and you might often hear them referred to as mixed status families. And to get a sense of the lives of these people and the struggle of mixed status families along and across the border, I'll take you out to the very western end of the border to a place called Friendship Park, which is a historic location in which I've been involved for many years. It's right where the border wall dives into the Pacific Ocean and overlooks the beach at Playas de Tijuana. Just to give you a sense of scale and context, the Friendship Park is about 6 miles to the west, 7 miles to the west from the San Ysidro port of entry. So we're traveling west along the border. And as we do, we're traveling through one of the most heavily fortified stretches of the entire U.S. Mexico border. Aida, in her brief presentation, mentioned the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Tratado de Libre Comercio, they call it in Spanish. And the 1990s rollout of this free trade agreement involved a simultaneous strategy, first built out by the Bill Clinton administration, but then pursued equally under both Republican and Democratic administrations ever since, of hardening the border, especially hardening the border at urban crossings like San Diego and Tijuana. So the 14 westernmost miles of the U.S. Mexico border that divide San Diego and Tijuana are all characterized by double walls. The walls that are run along the international boundary here define an enforcement zone. The federal government has taken land from the state of California or from other property holders by eminent domain in order to build border walls along the international boundary. And in doing so, across the years of 2008, 9, and 10, they built a double wall across Friendship Park, which is a historic location celebrated by people in San Diego and Tijuana. And it was long ago envisioned to be the place where there should be an international park where people would enter and exit from both countries in an orderly fashion and then return to their place. Much like there are several US Canada binational parks. So the idea of a place along the border where people would be able to share time together goes back generations. It was in 1971 that the surrounding area here in the United States was inaugurated as California's Borderfield State Park. And on August 18th, 1971, First Lady Pat Nixon inaugurated that park. She was the sitting First Lady of the United States, the sitting Republican First Lady of the United States. And on that occasion, at that time, there were just 3 strands of barbed wire at Friendship Park on the border. After inaugurating the park in the United States, Pat Nixon had her security detail cut the barbed wire, and she walked into Mexico to embrace the crowd that had assembled for the occasion. And she declared, "I hope there won't be a fence too long here." So for generations, people from both nations have been aspiring that this should be a location where people would be able to gather freely and exit and enter, perhaps in a way that you would think of people entering and exiting through a port of entry, a pedestrian port of entry, for instance. But instead, again, under both Republican and Democratic administrations, what's happened instead is that Friendship Park has had border walls built across it. And to give you a sense of contrast, before we hear from one of the families that visits at Friendship Park, I just want to give you a visual of what it looks like on the two sides of Friendship Park. So I'm going to drop down into street view, and this is the U.S. side of Friendship Park. As you can see, it's a beautiful spot overlooking the Pacific Ocean, and the surrounding area in the United States is actually an ecological preserve. So undeveloped coastal land, which is very rare here in Southern California. But as you turn to the south, you run into the border walls, and you can see that as you approach the international boundary, you're kept away by about 120 feet from people in Mexico. Through years of negotiation, our Friends of Friendship Park Coalition struck a deal with San Diego Border Patrol, whereby this little gate in the exterior wall would be opened on weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And limited number of people would be able to enter inside the double walls and approach the border wall itself, which has a thick metal mesh on it. But many of us fought very long and hard for that, because for thousands of families, this is the only place in the world where they can be reunited with their loved ones. I'll say more about that in just a minute. But suffice it to say that Friendship Park is of great historic and symbolic significance, but it's also of great practical importance to thousands of families, mixed status families, who are unable to be reunited in any other way. Now, to give you a sense of contrast, you saw it looks like it was designed by the Department of Homeland Security, doesn't it? Well, it was. By contrast, on the Mexican side of the border wall, the park is a wide open space. There are restaurants overlooking the beach. It's a vibrant, bustling park filled with thousands of people every weekend come to this location. And you can see that the border wall itself is painted and decorated with murals, much like the murals at Chicano Park. Though here at the border wall on the Mexican side, the artwork is always changing. I call it a perpetual canvas, because there's always somebody creating some piece of new artwork right here at the U.S. Mexico on the border wall. This photo was taken a couple of years ago. The signs on the wall there say, "Eres mi otro yo," you are my other me. And right at the center of Friendship Park stands this marble monument, which was the original boundary marker put in place at the end of the U.S. Mexico War. So some people call this the birthplace of the border, because it's the first place that at the end of the U.S. Mexico War, the binational commission established by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo met at this location and placed an original monument there to demarcate the new border. So it was where the U.S. Mexico border was first created after the U.S. Mexico War. So to get a sense of why and how so many of us fought for so long and so hard and continue to fight for improved access to Friendship Park, and why we're committed to this larger vision that someday there should be a binational park at this location, very much like there are binational parks on the US-Canada border. I'll just share a brief video that tells the story of some people meeting at Friendship Park. And then I'll open it up for questions. But let's first just hear a quick snippet and watch a few images from families meeting at Friendship Park.
It once was an open frontier.
May the Holy Spirit in whom all things are possible.
Then it became a line, then it became a fence, then it became a wall, then it became a double wall. Friendship Park is a very symbolic place. It is the birthplace of the border, and I do think you've seen the evolution of the border play out at Friendship Park. Friendship Park is a microcosm of the whole border. Even from its very origins, it was known to some as a very symbolic landmark. The monument that is at the center of the plaza is the original boundary marker between the United States and Mexico at the end of the U.S. Mexico War. And people visited it from both nations across all of these decades, 170 years now.
Mi hija y yo decidimos no volvernos a ver por ese parque nunca más, esperar el momento en podernos abrazar de nuevo.
The extra layer of protection was not always there. Before, it was more open and people were more able to touch each other. So what happened is the smuggling organizations located just south here of the border, they were using that opportunity where people were gathered to smuggle drugs and also money. The San Diego sector, we are responsible for 60 miles between Mexico and the United States. This area is very dangerous, given the proximity that we have to two cities with heavy populations. In order for us to keep this park open, we had to update our infrastructure in able to accommodate the people while maintaining America safe. So this is very much an enforcement zone. One of our goals is to have a good community engagement and to create a relationship, at least a work relationship with them, which at this point I think is a very good one. But the friendship circle is located within the United States. So all the laws apply. If I see something that makes me believe that the person may be illegal in the country, I will arrest the person and I will take them to the station to get it processed.
We're gathering at this historic location to remind ourselves of deeper truths, that we're friends, that we are not enemies, that we're neighbors. When I ask families or other visitors, I say, how'd your visit go? They're very, very sad to be separated from their loved ones, but they're also incredibly grateful and thankful to have had the chance. Families haven't seen each other 10, 15, 20 years. Families travel long distance, thousands of miles in each country just for a one-time reunion.
Okay. ¿Está bien? Sí, me dijo sí. Yo quiero abrazar. Pues yo también, que nos quisieras.
Every time I go there is a new experience. They teach me something new. Endurance, resistance, happiness, sadness.
Since the election of Donald Trump.
So there's a overview of Friendship Park. And before I open it up for questions, let me just close with one quick interview I did with a family. This was just about 2 years ago. A family that I interviewed after one of our border church services. Since November of 2011, we've been meeting at Friendship Park and celebrating communion on both sides of the border. And we do that in solidarity with the families that meet up there. So here's a quick interview with just one family who met up at Friendship Park, and I interviewed them after Border Church. Hi, it's John Fanestil from the Border Church, and I'm here with Marisela and Max, who came to visit to Friendship Park today, and we were able to celebrate our Border Church together. And I just wanted to introduce you to Marisela and Max, so that you would know some of the families who come to see their loved ones. Marisela, ¿nos puedes contar con quién visitaste aquí en el parque?
Sí, visité con mi mamá y con mis hermanos, mi sobrina,
with your mother and your nephews and everybody.
Así es.
¿Y de dónde vives tú, Marisela?
Yo vivo aquí en San Diego.
So you live right here in San Diego. ¿Y tu familia en Tijuana?
Mi familia toda está en Tijuana.
Yeah. Pero es aquí en el parque que se puede comunicar.
Puedo verlos.
Yeah, you can see them.
Aunque sea tocarlos así con el dedo, porque no.
Even just touching with the fingertips, yeah,
Eso
right.
es algo que se valora.
It's something very valuable to you. I'm so glad that you were able to visit with your family today. And Max, you're in school here in San Diego?
Yeah, I go to Chula Vista High School.
To Chula Vista High. You come down here with your mom to see your family?
Yeah, see my family.
That's great, man. I'm so glad that you were able to be here too. So, estamos muy agradecidos de que haya esta oportunidad de estar juntos con nuestros amigos, nuestros familiares. We're very happy and grateful that there's this opportunity to be together with families and friends. And we ask God's blessing on all people who would love to come together with their friends and family here on the U.S Mexico border. Y pedimos la bendición de Dios sobre todas esas familias que quieren estar juntos aquí en la frontera México-Estados Unidos. And we're grateful that we were able to get in today. Border Patrol opened the space and we were able to be together with our friends and family today. So we give thanks to God for that opportunity. Bendiciones a todos ustedes. Gracias Marisela. Thank you Max for estar con nosotros. Y nos estaremos viendo hasta la próxima vez. We'll see you next time, okay? Bye-bye. Bye.
Just one final word before I open it up for questions. These mixed status families are people with different kinds of immigration status, but most people who visit at Friendship Park are not undocumented. People like Marisela would have some kind of an immigration status, legal permanent residency, or perhaps she's processing an immigration case through our US courts, or perhaps she's a dreamer, that she has DACA. People, or she could be on parole if she had committed a crime and the judge released her from prison but gave her a number of years of parole. Turns out that there are thousands and thousands, really, we know hundreds of thousands of people who have some kind of legal status in the United States, but they can't leave the country or they will jeopardize their status. And when people like that have family members in Mexico who can't get a visa to come to the United States, then Friendship Park becomes the only place they can be reunited with their loved ones. So I hope this was helpul to you. I know as you all are learning, and I commend you for your interest in different cultures and different experiences, within the human family. And as you think about Hispanic heritage, I know Hispanic is such an umbrella category. I wanted to drill down and really introduce you to some very specific people and help you understand a little bit more about how people who live and along and across the U.S. Mexico border understand themselves. Some as Chicanos or fronterizos, and many, many, many as members of extended mixed status families. So with that, I'll finish up and I'll gladly answer any questions that you may have.
So if you can keep an eye, Reverend Fanestil, on the Q&A, I think you have access to those questions, and I will take the mic into the audience and see if anyone has questions.
Yeah, I see the question from Heidi about how I got involved. I did a year of my seminary training. I'm a pastor in the United Methodist Church, and I did a year of my seminary training in Costa Rica with the intention of getting my Spanish, up to snuff. And then my first appointment in the United Methodist Church, we're appointed to serve churches by our bishops. And my first appointment was to a little church right on the U.S. Mexico border, 2 hours east of San Diego, in a little town called Calexico. Little U.S. town called Calexico across from a very, very, very large Mexican city called Mexicali or Mexicali. And so I was 4 years on the border there and really fell in love with the people and cultures of the borderlands. And ever since then, I've been involved in some fashion or another. In 2004, my wife and family, we moved back to San Diego, which is my hometown. And from that point forward, I've been deeply involved in all kinds of work along and across the border, including at Friendship Park.
Now, if we speak into this mic, can you hear us?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Questions? Other questions in the audience? Would you like another question on the Q&A?
Thank you, Heidi. I'm not hearing another question just now, Tracy. Is there another question from the audience?
Hi, wonderful presentation. How has the policy changed under President Biden? He hasn't been in the very long, but he's certainly inherited quite a bit of new policies from President.
Yeah, I think I heard most of that about basically how the policy has changed under President Biden. Unfortunately, as far as Friendship Park goes, the park remains closed. San Diego Border Patrol is claiming that it's due to COVID, although vaccination rates in Tijuana are over 80%, and many of us are advocating that the park should be reopened. The Biden administration also declared a moratorium on construction of new border wall, but there are some places where they are replacing wall, and in our experience, replacement of wall often involves really what amounts to new construction. And then, of course, the Biden administration has been struggling with a large number of arrivals of folks seeking asylum. I didn't get into the whole asylum seeking challenge, which is a national challenge, not just confronted here at the U.S. Mexico border. But I would say, to be frank, that those of us who live along and across the border and have done so for many years don't see a lot of difference between Republican and Democratic policies. There's really been a strong bipartisan consensus ever since Bill Clinton inaugurated this policy that hardening the border and making it difficult and dangerous and deadly to cross the border is kind of the default position of U.S. border policy. President Trump, in my observation, added a layer of rhetoric, which I would describe as racist and vitriolic, and of course made the border wall kind of his almost the logo of his presidential campaign. But we're waiting, to be honest, to see a more, what we would think of as a more progressive and humane border policy from the Biden administration. And we're very much hoping that the Biden administration will embrace the vision that we have of International Friendship Park as a binational park like those that exist on the U.S.-Canada border. If you're interested to learn more about that vision, you could visit, I'll just mention a few websites. Friendshippark.org, of course, is our home base for Friendship Park. Viainternational.org is the nonprofit where I work, and it serves as our fiscal sponsor. And then buildthatpark.org is a place where we're building out the design of how a truly binational park would work, could be made to work at this historic location. I'm hopeful that the Biden administration may change more, but so far, not much change would be my answer.
One of my students who was unable to be in the live presentation here, she was wondering, so she spent some time in Texas, and she was wondering if the media tends to hype what is a regular occurrence, I think is the question, or is it does it make, I'm not sure, I wish she was here to ask this question, or no, is what we're hearing from the media accurate?
Yeah, I would say that it is, you can take what the media gives you with a large grain of salt. It captures realities of life along the border, but it captures only a tiny fraction of the realities along the border. So I've lived along the border now for many years, worked along the border for over 20 years. I've never witnessed an act of violence myself. I've never felt endangered or threatened by violence. Tijuana is a very large city, and it is a violent city, but its crime rate and homicide rate is not very much different than the crime rates and homicide rates in our large US cities. And the media, in my view, does gravitate and tend to dramatize and project out, the stories that I suppose sell, and the stories that sell are threat, danger, crime, violence, those kinds of things. My experience of the border is family, work, friendship, cross-cultural encounter, art, food, culture. That's the lived daily reality for the millions of us who live along the U.S. Mexico border. And in my experience, that's not very commonly projected or portrayed out to the larger American public by U.S. media. And Tracy, if you could all lean into the microphone, I think I'm hearing your questions, but they're a little faint. So
I just wanted to ask about right now.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing that question, Tracy. It'll have to be relayed again to me.
Okay, the international, we don't know much about the international, I think that this is about that some of the Asians are trying to live on the Mexican border. So I'm just wondering, some are even that Biden, President Biden, bring them back to Haiti, but a lot of them aren't even, they escaped there, I guess, 10 years ago or 20 years, 20 years ago. But yeah, I keep bringing them all back. They're reported back to Haiti. What is it? Do you know anything about the history of Haiti or anything that's kind of maybe out of your ballpark? But what is all that about? Why do they cross and why are they at the Mexican border too? Why can't they just come in? I don't know, water somewhere else. Okay. I don't know.
Tracy, could you summarize that question for me? I'm afraid I just didn't quite pick enough of it up to answer it confidently. Can you?
Sure, are you catching the mic at all?
Now I'm hearing you. Thank you.
Okay, so this woman was wondering about the Haitian migrants at the border and
Yes.
whether or not you're aware of any history. You know, she did mention that the Biden administration is sending some of these immigrants back to Haiti. Not sure if you've had any experience there in San Diego with the Haitian immigrants, and just kind of curious if you know anything about what's bringing them here.
Yes. In fact, we have a large Haitian population here in San Diego. I didn't get into it today because, again, I know that immigration and refugees are a much more common conversation, and I kind of wanted to chat about the untold story. But San Diego is the second largest refugee resettlement site in the country. We have large populations, partly because of our military history and large military infrastructure. We have a long history of resettling refugees here in the San Diego region. The exodus from Haiti originates with earthquakes as far back as 2007 and natural disasters. And then also civil war and political instability. Just recently, the president of Haiti was assassinated. But what you really have is Haitians have been exodusing from Haiti for many years now, almost 2 decades. Many of those traveled first to Latin America. For instance, many went to Brazil because there was work available to build and work preparing for the Rio Olympics of 2014, 2016, I can't remember which. So Haitians have been migrating throughout Latin America, but there have been several different times, and this most recent wave is just one of many, but several different times in which large numbers have come to the U.S. Mexico border when conditions were impossible for them to return to Haiti to seek asylum in the United States. And our asylum laws say that if somebody presents themselves to U.S. official at our borders and can make a credible claim to asylum, they should be given a court date and a hearing to apply for the status of a permanent refugee. So people from Haiti, from Central America, and in fact from around the world come to the U.S. Mexico border with the intent of claiming asylum. And that's turned into a great controversy as U.S. officials have often turned people away or prevented people from even making that claim in the first place. I see a question in the panel about in the comments about from Venezuela, and the answer is yes. Venezuela is another country that's suffering greatly, and anytime you can imagine when circumstances turn dire, people, my experience is human beings make very common sense decisions. That's my experience. Whenever I talk to people who are migrants or on the road, and we meet a lot of migrants, on the road at Friendship Park, for instance, whenever I get down to their basic story and hear how they chose, what they chose, these are not rocket science kinds of decisions. You know, when you want to feed your children, when you want to avoid violence, when you want to have a better future or a better opportunity to work, to support your family. And yes, Venezuelans. Now, I will say that Venezuelans, Haitians, and Colombians, others, most commonly will seek entry to the east coast of the United States, right, across the Caribbean. So these patterns of migration to Southwest Texas, to the east coast of the United States, or out here to the west coast, to San Diego, Tijuana, vary greatly according to, you know, opportunities and rumors as well, information and misinformation that exists in these networks about where there's opportunity to apply for asylum in the United States.
Hi, John. How long ago was it that people could more freely cross the border for work, for example, and maybe especially migrant workers who came for parts of the farming season?
Yeah.
How long ago, and when did that change? When was it that people couldn't just come back and forth so easily?
Yeah, the big change, there were, of course, formal programs like the Bracero program. Brazo is Spanish for arm, so workers, laborers in the mid 20th century. But the big change happened in the 1990s and the early 2000s with this hardening of the border that I mentioned. So just to illustrate that point, when I returned to San Diego in 2004, I visited friends in Tijuana, and they were talking about crossing the border, you know, how you got across the border illegally at that time. And in early 2000s, the price on the streets of Tijuana to cross the border illegally was about $250. It was an underground economy, but it was a very open economy in many ways. People knew how it worked. There were places you would go, people you could talk to. It was kind of, there were hotels and other institutions that were kind of set up for this traffic. And you could pretty much know that you could put down $250 or $350, and the next morning you would be in Los Angeles. And so, of course, in that kind of environment, which prevailed for decades in the late 20th century, people would come to work in the United States for a season and they would go home to Mexico. You know, your uncle dies in Jalisco, you go home for the funeral because, you know, to get back to LA to your job, it's $250 or $300. Right now on the streets of Tijuana, smuggling organizations are charging $10, $12, $15, $18,000. This is one of the unintended consequences of our having hardened the border. We've made it so difficult and dangerous and therefore costly to get into the United States illegally that criminal organizations are trafficking human beings. So we've seen the intermingling of the traffic of drugs and arms and other forms of contraband intermingled with the trafficking of human beings. And this is, of course, bad news for everybody. It's bad news for law enforcement, but it's especially bad news for migrants themselves, and women in particular are tremendously vulnerable to abuse. So it was really, you know, while it was illegal and not sanctioned through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there was a very regular pattern of migration that was based on labor markets, right? Again, we need workers and Mexicans want to work. That dynamic is a constant in the history of U.S. Mexico relationship. But it's since the early 2000s that the hardening of the border has made that circular flow, or that back and forth flow of workers, so very complicated. So I've heard people in high positions of authority in the United States government say, in a lot of ways, what we have is a labor market problem as much as we have an immigration problem, or we have a broken labor market. You know, you can't get the right worker to the right job at the right time legally. And when you can't get the right worker to the right job at the right time legally, guess what happens? Employers, US employers and workers will figure out a way to get the right worker to the right job at the right time illegally. That's facts on the ground of how our labor market works. And I don't see any fix to it, other than making a lot more work visas available, so that, you know, 1 in 10 California workers is undocumented right now. Our economy in California depends utterly on Mexican and other undocumented workers. So yeah, the disconnect between our immigration policy and our labor market needs is a huge problem, and unfortunately, no resolution in sight.
Could you, because we're running out of time, could you take the last minute or so to talk about, I just gave you a minute, that's all I gave you. To talk about your work at VIA International.
Yes, VIA International does community development with populations, specifically in Tijuana, also other parts of Mexico, but specifically in Tijuana. Our work is with migrants and deportees. We didn't really talk about deportees today. Folks who are deported from the United States to Mexico, another significant population. And our work is helping people to establish productive and independent lives for themselves, principally in Tijuana. So we work with shelters and community centers, teaching especially women leaders how to start their own businesses and create self-sustaining ways of developing their communities in San Diego and Tijuana. And if you'd like to learn more, viainternational.org, or please feel free to zip me an email, but john@viainternational.org. On another occasion, I'd be glad to tell you more. We also receive delegations and colleges and universities from around the country come to San Diego and Tijuana to learn about all this with us. So our travel immersive learning program is also available at viainternational.org.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Reverend Fanestil, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. So nice to see you. Thanks so much.
Looks like we have some comments coming in on chat yet.
Yeah, I will just put I'll put the website in here and my email address. I'm glad to answer more questions about the helping part, which I appreciate the question. So if people would like to learn more, they're welcome to ping me or check out the website. And Tracy, anything how did the videos come off? Were you all able to hear and see the videos okay?
Yeah, the sound and everything was great. Oh no,
oh, good.
On my phone as well. I'm going to turn my phone off because
One question?
of course, come here.
Hello?
Where's the camera?
Yeah, I know. Well, hello, I am the other Spanish teacher from previously, and we both teach many faces of Mexico.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you so much for reinforcing, I think, so much of the messaging that we've been doing for 20 years.
Oh, great.
But one of my, well, when you said braceros, you got an A+ right off the bat. But are you familiar at all with the Central American Overground Railroad that took place in the late 1980s?
The sanctuary movement, sure, yeah.
Yes, good,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Because
In
that's
fact,
something that I keep trying to get out, because I worked with them for a small period out of Colmer with Jubilee Partners.
oh, wonderful. Yeah. In fact, that's how I kind of got into ordained ministry, as I was working for a Central America solidarity organization that was affiliated with CISPES. I'm not sure if you Citizens in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. So it was adjacent organization to the sanctuary movement. And that was in the 1980s. And I spent some time in Central America, and that's really, yeah. Well, thanks for your work.
I just wanted to say a quick hi because I am retired now, but I am just going to have to get your email and just thank you in persona, un poco en persona,
okay.
right?
Con
and
gusto.
I realize we're still recording.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah, that's just fine. So I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for all watching.
Sure. And Tracy, to you and your colleague, I'll actually